Today's video lecture is going to focus on the development of plate tectonic theory. This all started over 100 years ago with the idea of continental drift. So for as long as accurate maps have existed, people have noticed that South America and Africa appear as though they could fit together if placed side by side, but most people dismiss this as simply a coincidence. But in the early 1900s, a German scientist named Alfred Wegener wondered if it was possible that the continents were actually linked together long ago, and he began collecting evidence to support his hypothesis. Some of the evidence that he collected were basically of three different types. Number one is he collected evidence of matching fossils across vast oceans, so the same species that existed on separate continents. Mountain ranges and rock layers or types that match up on different continents. And then the third one was evidence of climates that don't match their location. So for example, glacial deposits in tropical locations or fossils of tropical species in polar regions. So for example, one of these matching fossils is Mesosaurus, which is a reptile from the age of dinosaurs. And fossils of Mesosaurus are found only in South America and Western Africa, which makes sense if you were to put the continents together. During the time period that they lived, that's what is believed to have been the case now. Now, although Alfred Wegener had plenty of evidence to support his hypothesis, he couldn't explain how the continents were drifting apart. The best that he could come up with was that they were simply being pushed through the rock of the ocean floor. And physicists at the time were quick to point out that that was not possible. And so because of this, most scientists at the time rejected his idea of continental drift. And it wasn't until the 1960s, many years after Alfred Wegener's death, that new evidence helped to support his idea. So the discovery of seafloor spreading added new evidence to Wegener's hypothesis and helped scientists to understand how the continents were moving. In the mid-1900s, scientists discovered underwater mountain ranges running at or near the center of all major ocean basins on Earth. And these underwater mountain ranges came to be known as mid-ocean ridges. Mid-ocean ridges actually represent divergent plate boundaries. These are places on Earth where tectonic plates are moving away from one another. And as the plates move apart, hot rock from Earth's mantle, right, the layer below the crust, rises to fill that space, and it creates new oceanic lithosphere. And so this process is now referred to as seafloor spreading because the seafloor, the plates are pushed apart and new oceanic crust is created, and it actually causes oceans to widen over time, hence the name seafloor spreading. So here's an example over here on the left of this process happening at a mid-ocean ridge. You'll notice that the ridge is significantly higher in elevation than the other parts of the ocean floor on either side. You can see that you have continents on either side, and as this oceanic crust is pushed apart, material rises from the mantle to create new oceanic lithosphere. Now this process can actually happen on land as well. When it happens on land, it's referred to as a rift valley, and this is basically just the beginning of the process. If it continues for millions of years, then it will eventually turn into what we see over here on the left. It could widen into an entire ocean. This center area would drop lower and lower in elevation and eventually fill with seawater, and then you'd have an ocean in the middle with two continents on either side that are slowly getting farther and farther away from each other. So evidence of seafloor spreading can be seen in the age of the ocean floor. If new crust is constantly being created at the ridge, then in theory, it would push the older crust farther away. So the age of the rocks and oceanic crust should get older the further you get from the ridge. And this is, in fact, exactly what scientists found when they started to date the rocks of the ocean floor, determine the actual age of the rocks on the ocean floor. They found that they get progressively older as you get further away from the ridge. Here's a good map that shows that. All of the reddish colors indicate relatively young oceanic lithosphere. And then as you progress through the orange, yellow, green, and all the way to blue and purple and eventually pink, the ages of the ocean floor get progressively older. So you'll notice that near the ridges, all of these red areas, that's where the oceanic crust is the youngest. And as you get farther away from the ridges, closer to the continents, the crust gets progressively older. So more evidence of seafloor spreading can be seen in the symmetrical pattern of alternating magnetic polarity in the rocks of the seafloor. This can be a really complicated concept to understand, so I'm not going to get into it too much other than to say that This occurs because the Earth's magnetic field periodically reverses polarity, meaning the magnetic North Pole becomes the South Pole and vice versa. Not the actual North and South Pole of the Earth. We're talking about the North and South magnetic poles of the Earth. So these reversals actually don't really have a significant impact on the living things on the Earth, but evidence of these reversals can be found in the rocks of the seafloor, and that evidence can be found on both sides of a mid-ocean ridge. And it creates basically this mirror image on either side of the ridge, indicating that the seafloor is spreading at an equal rate on either side of the mid-ocean ridge. So let's talk now a little bit about how all this now came together into the theory of plate tectonics. So first of all, evidence for plate tectonics. Well, all of the evidence that Wegener used to support his hypothesis of continental drift can also be applied to the theory of plate tectonics. But in addition to that, we also have this new evidence that we've just talked about. So the relatively young age of oceanic crust compared to continental crust. This provides evidence for the constant recycling of oceanic crust through seafloor spreading and subduction, which is the process of the crust sinking into the mantle. Also the symmetrical age and magnetic patterns of the ocean floor on either side of a mid-ocean ridge. And more recently, with the invention of GPS, more recent evidence has come through that use of that technology where scientists can actually measure the exact rate and direction of movement of the tectonic plates. All right, now the theory of plate tectonics doesn't just include evidence that it's happening, but it also explains how. And that was one of the biggest things that Alfred Wegener was missing from his hypothesis of continental drift. So the main process that drives plate tectonics is called mantle convection. The slow convection of rock caused by the uneven distribution of thermal energy in Earth's interior. Convection refers to the movement of rock up or down based on differences in density. So hotter rock rises over time, cooler rock sinks. If you remember from our Earth's interior lesson, the rock in the mantle, even though it's technically a solid, it's soft and can move and flow slowly over time. And so these convection currents move mantle material in circular patterns within the mantle. And as the convection cycles occur within the mantle, the tectonic plates above are basically moved as if they're on a very slow conveyor belt. Now, two other processes also help mantle convection to move the tectonic plates. One of those things is called slab pull. Slab refers to the tectonic plate, and as it begins to subduct, it's referred to as subducting slab of rock. And so the slab pull occurs as gravity helps to pull a subducting tectonic plate further into the mantle. Ridge push occurs because a mid-ocean ridge is higher in elevation relative to a subduction zone. So gravity causes the oceanic lithosphere to slowly slide off the ridge toward the subduction zone. And finally, what did it take for the scientific community to finally accept this theory of plate tectonics? Well, once scientists were able to explain not only what was happening, but could also provide a logical explanation for how it was happening, then the theory of plate tectonics became much more widely accepted by the scientific community.